Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Hardcover Hooligans podcast. My name is Mac. With me is Danilo. And Danilo, I have a question for you.
Go for it.
If you had to be some vague riff on an already existing DC superhero, who would it be?
I would... I want to say Batman because I do really like Batman, but there's already a Batman stand-in in
there
this
sure
book.
Is. I mean, that's okay. You can just say Night Owl if you want. He's pretty cool.
Or I'd be like the Flash, but something like that. Like
oh
I'd
yeah,
run
there
really
is no
fast.
Flash.
Yeah,
yeah, that would be cool. The quick. Oh, that's just from SpongeBob. The Quickster.
I'd be called the Quickster, and I'd run around really fast.
So if you don't know what we're talking about and you just didn't see the title of the podcast episode and you just clicked on it, we're reading Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' Watchmen.
Mm-hmm. A graphic novel. Those are books too, folks.
Novel. Yes, the first in our descent into comic book madness. Mm-hmm. We're starting with Watchmen. Published from serialized, so there's 12 issues, 1986 to 1987, September to October. So almost exactly a year. Watchmen, if you don't know anything about it, just the abstract, if you will, is it has been referred to as, I have a quote here, BBC's Nicholas Barber described it as the moment comics grew up. Now, Alan Moore disagrees with that because there are lots of dark comics like that, but it is certainly a different type of comic book story.
It's very, I think, rich in different ways than maybe comic books used to be or have the reputation of being rich, like thematically, character depth,
for sure,
ambiguity, all that stuff.
And it also, if you really think about it, features a entirely second graphic novel inside about pirates called the Curse of the Black Freighter, which we will, or Tales of the Black Freighter, which we have to talk about. We're not going to talk about it now. I think we'll talk about the whole book and then we'll talk about that because it's. Yeah. I think it might be the most interesting part of the whole thing for me, just because I find its inclusion so weird and cool. Yeah. Anyway, Danilo, what is your relationship with comic books?
So when I was young, I read Garfield comic books, collections.
Hell yeah.
And that is sort of where it began and ended. I was telling Mac this earlier when I saw him. I think I was reading this and I'm like, have I ever read like an actual superhero comic book before in my life? And I think the answer was no. I think this is the first superhero real comic book I've read that's like a real superhero comic. I have, though, my relationship with Watchmen specifically, I have seen the Zack Snyder movie, and I watched the HBO show, which is very good.
Yeah. I think I'll be interested as we go through this to hear what your like sort of take is on this is a... Inversion is a big word, but it's sort of like, I don't know. This is like the first to make it really reductive. This is like The Boys way before The Boys. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That definitely gave me those vibes. Yeah.
Yeah. And just for me, I really like comic books. I've read like a gajillion of the like it's like original like Amazing Fantasy Spider-Man run. I just find them so, I don't know. I love comic books.
That's awesome.
And so I love Watchmen. And fun fact, DC Rebirth in 2016, when I started picking up comic books again, there's a huge event and DC Universe reset. The final panel of the first one that features Batman, he's digging in the Batcave and he finds the comedian's pin, and it was like their attempt to put them both in the same world, and it's whatever. Who cares? Who cares?
And is there a whole comic about how the comedian's pin ended up in the Batcave?
You know, that's a really good question. There is a yes, I think so, because there's a series called I think it's called The Button, and it's a sequel to Rebirth and Flashpoint, which some people you might know fans of this
I
podcast
know
might know what
nothing.
Flashpoint is. It's when the Flash destroyed the whole universe. It's what the Flash movie that just came out is doing.
Oh,
Flashpoint.
okay.
That's why the Zack Snyder's DC universe doesn't exist.
I also don't think, I know, DC's efforts to make a Marvel thing that has constantly failed. I don't think Watchmen works if there's any other superheroes in the world, like at all.
No.
But I gotta try something, I guess. I don't know.
Okay, so let's just hop right into it. So the book opens with a guy getting pushed out of a 12-story or a high-rise apartment to his death, and he's being investigated by two detectives. And we meet. This is our first encounter with the costumed adventurer, as they are often referred to throughout this, not as superheroes but as adventurers. Rorschach. Now Rorschach is like what he's sort of. There's sort of two Batman riffs going on in this book. There's Night Owl, obviously, which we will get into, but there's also Rorschach because he's like the detective part of Batman.
And he's
so
also
he's
also the orphan guy who like the world fucking sucks and only I can fix it, and I can fix it by killing people.
Yeah, he's constantly writing in his edgy diary, and he thinks he figures out that the comedian or the man who died, whose name is Edward Blake, was the superhero comedian, and so him in his sort of like conspiracy theory brain thinks that this must mean that somebody is trying to assassinate other costumed adventurers, and specifically maybe the Watchmen, which is their group.
It took me, not a long time, but it just took me a time to adjust to the fact that like the comedian was like the superhero, and like what was he? And he was like just kind of he's just buff and had a cigar. He liked to punch people. He worked for the government. Like that's basically it.
I believe I would argue the comedian's closest superhero analog is Captain America, because he serves for the United States military.
It's a version of that.
But it's like so what if Captain America was doing horrific war crimes in Vietnam and not a superhero? He's also obviously the comedian, the Joker. I mean, come on, that's not.
I think it took me a second. Like none of these superheroes, with the exception of one big exception, like have superpowers. Like that's not part of it. Like they're just like people. And I think the Zack Snyder movie makes it sort of like, I think, more ambiguous, because like Rorschach has that like weird mask. It looks like sort of magical or something. I don't know, but
in this too. That's because it's made out of the goop that made Dr. Manhattan. It's part of the clothes that they were manufacturing. Yeah. So he worked for Rorschach worked for a dressmaker that was making clothes using Dr. Manhattan magic, and he cut out a piece of the clothes which changes fabric, and that's why he wears that on his face. So the Rorschach thing is changing through every panel is not the same picture.
Oh, I didn't get that. I remember how he got it, but I did not. I guess I missed that dress that he made the mask out of was connected to Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah. He's Dr. Manhattan. So let's just talk about it like this. So Dr. Manhattan is the only Dr. Manhattan, real name John Osterman, is the only real superhero. The only one with powers, and his powers are
everything.
He can
do anything. And I think that's such a good. I think that's an incredible choice. Like I love that. Like,
yes, I do
for the
too.
boys. Like when why am I blanking on his name? Homelander, yeah, like just super having someone that's like super powerful and like totally beyond like anything, which is like how a superhero like should be, and like the implications of that. I just love when they go there, and I feel like I don't know if Dr. Manhattan would be like the first example of that, but that really is what it feels like. Is that he's so powerful, he like is totally, he's like not a human anymore almost.
And I think it really works because unlike, I think the evil Superman trope that, famously now we have Homelander, I think can be pretty stale. But making him not evil Superman, but like nonchalant Superman is really good because like why would he care about
He's
anything?
so
He
powerful.
only cares about
He doesn't care about humanity anymore.
He cares about like he's like Mars is crazy. Like you got to see Mars. That's like seriously the only thing he cares about is like the Martian landscape. And maybe Lori a little bit still, but
and he hates how complicated people are and how people just can't understand him. Yep,
he does.
And I think so. As we're going through characters, I just want to like note that like that chapter that's like his backstory and his creation is like I think one of like the best things I've read. I think it's a fucking masterpiece. It's incredible.
Yeah. You are not the only person to feel that way. It is though all of the Dr. Manhattan sections in this book are my favorite, maybe my favorite pieces of fiction ever because he is such a compelling character. So Dr. Manhattan, his dad,
he's blue. First of all, he's blue.
He's blue.
You see his
tiny dick one time in the comic book. You see
I feel like you see it a bunch.
You see his butt a bunch, but you see his tiny dick one time. Or maybe once or twice, but it's mostly just his butt and upper shot, so they don't. Yeah. Well, because his superhero costume is hilarious because it's just like he's wearing underwear. Like he's like, I don't want to wear this anymore,
and then it just vanishes.
Yeah. So he was a scientist. Who his girlfriend at the time forgot her watch in the chamber that makes that combines objects, and she's like, you gotta go get my watch for me. So he says okay. So he walks into the chamber, the super special radioactive chamber that makes you magical, and it closes, and he goes, no, you gotta help me out. And then him and the watch like fuse, and he disappears, and he like rebuilds himself into this new version of himself. And he's blue, and he can literally do anything. So he controls like
matter.
Let me
and time, and he like experiences like all time at once. So he like knows what's gonna happen, but he also is living the past. And so like, the thing that makes the chapter so good is that like it is him experiencing his whole story all at once. And so then, like,
because he always is,
and you as the reader get to experience that and piece it all together. Oh, it's so good.
So he just controls matter, and so like he can make new shit. So the 80s that this book takes place in is not like our 80s. There's like airships and cool technology, and it's all thanks to Dr. Manhattan's magic. And it's
electric cars because Dr. Manhattan can just make the material that the batteries need. They don't have to like mine it.
Yeah. And you would think that this would maybe lead to a United States of America that is, free of pollution, and Dr. Manhattan's a force for good. But what it really is that Dr. Manhattan is a weapon utilized by the U.S. government to deter Soviet aggression. Because if you don't know anything about history, there's a little thing going on called the Cold War. Yep. And so this book posits, what if, instead of the Cold War being two sides not wanting to start nuclear Armageddon, it was one side wanting to start nuclear Armageddon and one side that had a big blue guy who could just destroy everybody who lives in your country with a thought. And that makes people very uncomfortable, and superheroes are eventually outlawed, except for Dr. Manhattan and the Comedian, because they work for the government.
Yep.
We have Night Owl, Daniel Dryberg, who's he's just Batman. He has the Batcave, and he dresses like an animal. My parents
left me a lot of money, and I have a cave, and an owl. There was definitely, I don't remember. There's a lot more Owl Man than I thought. There's a lot of Owl Man in this. They have a little side adventure. They rescue some people. There's a whole romance. I'm like, I've never heard this Owl guy before, and there's a lot of Owl guy. Which was fine. It wasn't bad, but I definitely was taken aback by the amount of Owl guy.
Before the book starts, there's this group of superheroes. The Night Owl. So there's
two generations.
Yes, there's two generations of superheroes. The old generation had Night Owl still
from like the 30s and 40s.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
Night Owl, Comedian, Silk Spectre, Hooded Justice. Right. There are some others, but eventually they sort of stop being superheroes, and then the new generation starts, and there's a second Night Owl and a second Silk Spectre, and the other ones are Dr. Manhattan, Rorschach, Ozymandias, and the Comedian still, because he can't let go.
Yep.
So we'll talk about Ozymandias. He's like a rich. He's like the smartest man in the world. He's like, what if Lex Luthor was a good in quotation marks superhero? He has like cool karate abilities, and he has a weird. The first time we see him, he's like evilly petting his genetically engineered dog. So if you have any sort of like, your hackles go up sort of right up. You're like, I don't really know about this fucking guy. Like this, his name is Ozymandias, which is an insane name, like to refer to yourself in a superhero fashion as.
And he loves like ancient Egypt and Alexander the Great.
Oh,
and he's like,
yes,
I want to do
does.
something with my life that's just like them. And so all of, I would say like all of these superheroes, which I liked, is that you like learn about them and you're like, I don't know if these guys should be doing anything.
Yeah.
Which is also which I think is great because it makes them all like morally ambiguous and also answers the question of like, what sort of person would become a superhero, like dress up and beat people up because they think like the world's gone wrong, Like they're not all gonna be mentally stable people. And so I liked that about this, which also makes it more, I don't know why then, like immediately when I read Rorschach, I was like, oh, this guy's like complicated. But then there's like edgy people online who are like, Rorschach's like a good guy. Like, you got to be like him. Like, I guess it's the same like population that's like the Joker was onto stuff,
right? I mean, and that's what's so, not to put the cart before the horse, but that's what makes the Watchmen TV show so good, is because that's literally what they do with the character of Rorschach. And they're like, oh, okay, so what if a bunch of weird 4chan guys found Rorschach's notebook and started their? Because listen, Rorschach is not. He is not the most politically correct superhero in the world.
He literally like reads right-wing newspapers for like comfort.
Yes. And he writes in his book some harsh judgments of poor people and drug users. And so, yeah. Also, I just wanted to correct something. The comedian is based on the old Charlton Comics character Peacemaker, not the John Cena version of Peacemaker that we...
Okay.
Because a little background to the story... DC got all the Charlton Comics characters, and they were like, oh, we have to do something. Alan Moore, you should write a story with them. And then the story he pitched, they were like, what, are you out of your fucking mind? We can't do that with these characters. And so he was like, okay, I'll just make my own characters. And so they're all based off of those Charlton characters, except, so like, Night Owl is based on the DC character Blue Beetle. Like, that's what he said. But I mean...
Which, aren't they making a movie of that? Or they're going
It's out already. It's been out.
Oh, that's so funny.
So anyway, there's also Laurie Juspecic, who's Dr. Manhattan's lover, and also the most reluctant superhero of the bunch. She was forced into it by her mother. She doesn't want to be a superhero at all, and she hates it. Which, I mean, fair.
Yeah.
I would hate it too. And also she's in love with she was in love with the man John Osterman, now is forced to be in love by the U.S. government with the man Dr. Manhattan, because the government believes that if Laurie were to leave or they were to break up, Dr. Manhattan would do what he does in the comic book, which we'll talk about. So there's a funeral for the comedian, and Rorschach is there, and he notices an interesting man at this funeral, and he has sort of the same face and look as maybe a old villain that the Watchmen used to face. And Dr. Manhattan goes on a TV show, and he is accused by a newspaper. Is it the Nova Express or the New Front? I don't remember. I can never remember which one is the right-wing newspaper.
I think New Frontier or whatever, that's the right-wing one. Yeah.
Okay. So the Nova Express newspaper, because the issue, something that is really fascinating in this book is that at the end of each chapter, there's like an in-world, either
excerpt.
Newspaper clipping, an excerpt from a book, like notes from a producer about a potential superhero TV show. And one of them is from the New Frontiersman defending superheroes. And in that newspaper, it's making a compelling point for superheroes until it draws the comparison to other masked vigilantes defending their homelands. And what that newspaper is referring to is members of the Ku Klux Klan. And as soon as like it's referred to that it's a right-wing newspaper, but that's like the first excerpt you read where it's like, whoa, they're a right-wing newspaper. Like, that is crazy. Like, defending the Ku Klux Klan and showing like the argument for why masked vigilantism is good is because the like people have been doing it forever, and using the KKK as an example is so, or like, it really like for us in our real world to be like, man, I wish there was a superhero who could save us. It's like, are we sure?
Well, because then it's like, you know, it's, I think what this shows so well is like the nature of superheroes being like a reflection of what humans like value or like think is good. Because like, yeah, we want a superhero, but we want the superhero to do what we think is right, you know, like us personally, not like what they think is right, because that might not be what we think is right. And so I think that is just such a great exploration of like these superheroes. Like, the people behind the costume aren't neutral, but like the image of a superhero is almost like a blank slate for people to read into what they want. Almost like a Rorschach test.
Almost. Interesting. Very interesting. So Rorschach goes to the guy's house that he saw at the funeral, and this is Moloch. Danilo, do you want to talk about Moloch?
Yeah, so he's an old guy now. I thought these like old villains were like interesting because they're like such like has-beens, and like
it's really
they're kind of losers. Like, they used to be these villains. Like, you get all this backstory of like they were these villains in the 40s, like villains in quotes, because like once the mask, like, the villains didn't come first. Like, the masked heroes came first, and then these like sort of villains came, and they were just sort of like gang leaders or drug lords, and some of them had like a little bit of more showmanship, but then like the good guys like beat them in like 2 seconds, and then they'd go to prison and then come back, and then either they'd be like, I don't want to do that anymore, or they'd like try it again, and then the good guys would beat them, they go back in prison. So it's also interesting from this universe, from the fact that like the superheroes didn't arise because there was like this big bad that had to be destroyed. You know, they like arose from this like morally gray, like we need to like get society back in order. And the villains that arose were sort of like secondary and almost like paper tigers almost. Like, they weren't. They were the result of the superheroes. Like, the crime was still
Moloch is
happening,
really embarrassing. Like, if you think about like a guy like that being real, he was
like a magician. Yeah, but now he's like an old guy in an apartment. He has cancer, and it's very sad.
It's super sad. And Rorschach goes to his house, and he's like, "You killed Edward Blake," and he's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "I
don't want any I don't want any trouble. I spent the last 10 years in prison. Like, I just wanted to pay my respects to this guy, you know."
And he's like, very interesting, and you're like, why did Moloch want to pay his respects to Edward Blake? But it's revealed later why, upon Rorschach's second visit. So Dr. Manhattan, after he realizes, we started talking about something different after I brought this up. The newspaper, the Nova Express, confronts Dr. Manhattan because the Nova Express, the left-leaning newspaper, hates superheroes. Like, because the whole world
they're all fascists.
Only presents them as incredibly fascist maniacs. And they have a bunch of evidence. Turns out it's fabricated, but evidence that Dr. Manhattan has been giving cancer. Giving the people around him cancer. So Moloch has cancer because Dr. Manhattan would like beat him up. So that's why he has cancer. And like some of his former colleagues from back when he was a scientist and when he turned into Dr. Manhattan have cancer, and they died because of Dr. Manhattan. So he exiles himself to Mars. He just disappears. He's like,
he's like, fuck that. Because also his relationship with Lori was like not doing well, because like they were having. It wasn't like they were having sex, and he was also like working on science in the other room because he can like do multiple things at once. And she's like, "What the hell, man?" And he's like, "I don't understand what you want from me."
Yeah, that is literally a scene. They're having sex, and he's she like gets up because he says something like uncouth, and she goes into the other room, and he's like doing science in there, and then he taps her on the shoulder, and she realizes he's in both places at the same time. That would also make me upset.
Mm-hmm. But you don't understand, Mac. He can give his full attention to both because he's Dr. Manhattan.
So now that Dr. Manhattan is gone, the Soviets are on the move, and they're encroaching. They invade Afghanistan, and the whole time the book keeps. There's like World War III is on the horizon. There's like newspapers coming out about World War III, like the world is about to end in a nuclear holocaust. And Laurie seeks out Dryberg, who's
AKA Night Owl. Yeah.
They used to be buddies, and then they stopped talking because once the superheroes broke up, they didn't talk anymore. And so they're like, "Hey, remember all the good times we had together?" And they start developing a little bit of a relationship. Maybe. But, in Dan Dryberg's defense, I would also be a little wary of putting the moves on the girlfriend of, like, the most powerful being to ever exist ever. So he is maybe unsure about this. Dr. Manhattan, later, he doesn't really care at all, because, obviously...
He's like, I have perspective. I don't do whatever you want.
Yeah, so, hang on, I'm trying to make sure I get this all in the right order here. Because I think that happens later.
And like as this is going on, Rorschach is investigating the comedian's murder still, and he keeps contacting all like the other Watchmen and being like, "Hey, I think someone's killing Watchmen," and they're like, "Don't be silly. The comedian had a lot of enemies, whatever." And
there's an assassination attempt on Adrian Veidt's life,
right?
Ozymandias. He's like on his way to yoga class, and a gunman bursts in and shoots his assistant like right in the head. And Ozymandias, because he takes like karate class, he starts whooping his ass. But the gunman chews a cyanide pill and dies. And Rorschach is like, Jesus Christ, like he had a cyanide pill. Like who would send a guy like this? We're in way deeper than we think. Like we're facing like a real supervillain.
The comedian's gone. And then, like, Rorschach is like, what if someone planted that story about cancer to get Dr. Manhattan to leave, and now someone tried to kill Adrian Veidt, and so he's putting together all the dots in his edgelord diary.
There's the only scene that I like remember very clearly from the Watchmen movie is this part where Rorschach's on his investigation, and I'm gonna just start telling these bullet points here out of order because the whole kind of story is told out of order.
Because then there's the through line is this investigation of like who's killing these superheroes, and then there's like the relationships are happening and they talk to each other, and then we get an issue or a chapter that's the backstory of that's just the entire backstory of one character. And I think there's another great chapter. I don't know if we have to talk about it too much, but the backstory of Rorschach, I think that's also a fantastic
we'll definitely talk about that.
Okay, great. Yeah.
We could talk. I just want to say he gets a tip from Moloch, and he's like, "I know more about the comedian than I let on." And I can't. Maybe it was the first time they met. Moloch divulges to Rorschach that Edward Blake got really drunk one night and like broke into Moloch's apartment and sat on the edge of his bed and went on this crazy rambly speech about this island of artists who have been like all kidnapped, and
they're working on something.
Yeah, they're working on something, and the world is going to end, but it's not going to end because of like nuclear violence. It's going to end in a much worse and much more confusing way, and he's freaking the fuck out. And then he just leaves, and he doesn't kill Moloch. And when Rorschach goes back to Moloch's apartment, he gives his super cool badass superhero "I gotcha" speech, and then he actually finally looks at Moloch, and he's been shot in the head. He's dead.
Yep.
Somebody killed him.
And the cops are outside.
And the cops are outside. Oh my god! And so Rorschach, this is the part I remember from the movie, and it's also in this. He gets a lighter and his like an aerosol can, and he just starts whooping ass until he is forced to jump from a 3-story building and just collapse right in front of the police, and they arrest him because obviously, because he's not really Batman. He's not really a cool.
He's
superhero.
Just a guy.
He's like also 5'6". Like he just is seriously just some dude who wears a cool mask. And so they take him to jail, and then this is where we start learning about Rorschach's backstory. Janilla, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so it's they take off his mask and now we see what he looks like, and he's like a red-headed guy. And so the whole section is
Walter.
the whole section is like his dialogue with this psychiatrist.
Oh my god. And it's all from the psychiatrist's perspective, which is such a good idea.
It's really good because the psychiatrist like thinks he's like having a breakthrough, but you can tell that like he's lying about what he sees on like the Rorschach tests. Like he puts up a test and then Rorschach says like, "Oh, it's a butterfly," but we see what he sees and it's like a dog with its head split open. Like, oh man, and the psychiatrist's like, "I think I'm really getting through to him. You know, we're almost there."
You're
and
being
it's
lied
like,
to by a
dude,
maniac.
you're not. And I don't remember what leads. Oh, then there's like the prisoners all want to like kill him and shank him, and
Yeah.
but Rorschach is a tough cookie and keeps like fighting back against them and like throws hot oil into like another guy's face and then
kills that dude.
and kills him and then says is this the first time that this has been said where he's like, I'm not locked in here with you, you're locked in here with me?
He does. I don't know if that's the first time, but it's the first time I can remember as somebody enjoying media where I saw that. I mean, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Rorschach says a lot of things that I think get taken to, like, people are like at the very end of this, he's like, the pursuit of truth. He's like, nothing will ever stop me. Like, I'll keep moving forward. Or he says something like that to Dr. Manhattan at the very end of the book. And some people on the internet are like, that's so cool. And it's like, really? Because I think he's like a crazy Nazi. But
well, I think the thing with this character that's so like evocative and like what his character does is like, he has such strong principles that he won't negotiate on, and it sort of shows who you'd have to be if you really did not negotiate on your principles and you were 100% consistent with everything. Like, that's not good.
You'd be a maniac.
Like, you'd be a maniac. You'd be in prison for killing people, and then you have an entire prison of people trying to kill you.
So his backstory is he had, you know, his father is MIA, his mother is a prostitute who abuses him. Mm-hmm. He gets picked up by child services. He excels in school. He's a really smart kid. And then he becomes a superhero. He becomes Rorschach.
He like gets bullied and then he like stands up to them and then gets flagged as like a troubled kid. And then he sort of learned that like, oh, you know, no matter what I do, like the only thing I can do is like fight back against what the world has done to me.
And so he starts out as a good, like, normal superhero.
Yeah.
When they're part of the Minutemen. Oh no, that was the old one. When the Watchmen are meeting together and they're like trying to decide on their name. There's a very funny. He's not in it much. His name is Captain Metropolis. The other members of the Watchmen are Captain Metropolis and the Mothman, but Captain Metropolis is like a loser, and the Mothman is like a alcoholic who's in a mental institution because being a superhero took it out of him so much. But Captain Metropolis is trying to like get them all together, and we see this scene in Rorschach is like normal, and we're like, oh, what? This isn't normally how he is. And we learned that on one assignment, Rorschach was investigating the disappearance of this girl, and it led him to this dressmaker place, and Rorschach sort of puts it together that this evil, like, pedophile dressmaker captured and abused this girl and then fed her to his dogs. Mm-hmm. And he killed those dogs and killed the guy and burnt it down. And that was the first time he killed somebody. And ever since then, Rorschach has been insane. And also why he saw the dead dog in the Rorschach test.
Yep. Well, and he describes it because, like, the at some point, you know, after the prison thing, the psychiatrist is like, so I guess we didn't make as much progress as we thought. Do you want to tell me what's actually going on? And
and
Rorschach is like, okay, here you go. And he tells them this whole story, and then he's like, that's when Walter Kovacs, like that's his name, like ceased to exist, and then he was only Rorschach, because then he feels like when he has his mask on, that's like who he is. He calls it his face. Yeah, he calls it his face. Because when they rip it off him, he's like, give me my face back, give me my face back.
That's a really fucked. The police ripping it off of him, and that when you see Walter Kovacs throughout the whole book up until this point. He's carrying a sign that says the end is nigh. You see him a bunch throughout the book, and you sort of know like that. Okay, well that's
probably
Rorschach.
him.
Yeah. But when it's finally revealed to you as like this cool badass dude is like screaming and crying about like this thing he wears, it's really like deeply unsettling. I think. And so he's in prison.
And then the psychiatrist hears that.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Oh my god. And he goes home and like won't have sex with his wife. And his wife is like, what the hell? And the psychiatrist is like, the world's a dark, horrible place.
It's his investigation to Rorschach is ruining his life, his like home life. I think the end of the in the final chapter of the book, right before this huge catastrophic event happens, we see the psychiatrist again about to meet his wife, and he sees these two people fighting on the street.
Oh, yeah.
And he turns and like advances towards them to break it up, and his wife, because she's sick of it. I mean, fair. I think she's written very well and is absolutely fed up with this guy. She's like, you have to stop involving yourselves in things that don't involve you. And he's like, if we don't do it, nobody else will. And it's like the only moment in all of Watchmen where it brings about the idea of like, well, maybe like intervening in the sort of way a superhero might intervene would be good. But the way the psychologist is doing it is just a helpful man on the street, not a guy in a mask stalking the buildings and beating up criminals. He's just helping his fellow neighbor, which is really beautiful. And then his reward is he gets crushed by a giant squid. So
which we'll get to.
Yeah.
But that also makes like that complicates, like the innate human drive to be like, I want to fight for what's right, and then the extremes that gets taken to when you put on a mask, you involve the government, like when justice is in the hands of like one person, all the problems with that. So I liked all those questions that this raised.
So Rorschach's in jail, and Night Owl and Silk Spectre are like, let's break fucking Rorschach out.
We break him out.
Let's get the boys back together. We're going to figure this out. We're going to finally figure this out.
Because then he's obvious. Then it's like, now Rorschach is getting put away. So like, clearly maybe something's going on.
Yep. And so they break out Rorschach, and they start to have this plan where they're going to be like, okay, so we're going to figure this out and blah, 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 and do this, that. And then Dr. Manhattan, he's just like, hey, I'm back. Lori, we're supposed to have an argument in 20 minutes. And she's like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, I live every moment in time, all the time, and in 20 minutes we're on Mars arguing. And she's like, well, then fine, let's go to Mars and have this argument. And so they do. They leave Dryberg and Rorschach to go investigate who they think might be behind the conspiracy or might know more about the conspiracy, because they put it together that perhaps Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias, might be behind the masked adventurer killings.
Because they found like a shell corporation that leads back to him or something, right?
Yeah. The Pyramid Industries or something, and also the company studying...
What other Egypt guy do we know? Oh, yeah. Ozymandias. He names all his stuff after Egypt stuff, so I wonder who could control Pyramid Industries. The sci-fi company that like Dr. Manhattan was doing projects for is also owned by Ozymandias, so just the whole thing is like, well, I mean, okay, if there's ever a guy who could orchestrate something like this, it would probably be the smartest man in the world. So let's just go ask him some questions. And so this is when Dr. Manhattan and Laurie Juspecic have, in my opinion, one of the greatest interactions between two characters ever in any book ever on Mars. Laurie essentially is mad. It would be very reductive here. Laurie is mad that Dr. Manhattan doesn't care about anything. Dr. Manhattan is trying to explain to Laurie that it doesn't matter if he cares about anything, because he lives in all periods of time. Like, none of this really matters. In the grand scope of things, none of this matters. Or like it's all equal. Like,
it's all equally like either bad or good.
Right, yeah, like it's all like, have you ever seen a quark? Like quarks are just as beautiful as the sun, like it's all the same.
And Dr. Manhattan sort of takes his own argument and realizes that like the impossibility of the universe allowed somebody as wonderful as Laurie to exist in the first place. And he sort of regains a little bit of John Osterman's humanity in that moment and decides that, okay, maybe I've been a little bit distant.
Well, that also coincides with Lori realizing who her father is. That's when that happens
Yeah.
too. Yeah. Should we talk about this now?
Yes, well, let's be very delicate about this. So,
Yes. So content warning for like
yes.
sexual assault and stuff. So if you don't want to listen to this, skip ahead like 5 minutes, I guess.
Way earlier in the book, it is revealed to us, the reader, that the reason that Laurie hates the comedian is because the comedian tried to rape her mom, the original Silk Spectre, and was only stopped because the superhero Hooded Justice happened to double back and see what was going on with
And
Laurie.
and beat up the comedian. Yeah.
It beat up the comedian, and then Laurie and Hooded Justice started this relationship, but nobody really knew if it was just for like the cameras or if it was just so that he could protect
And
Laurie from the comedian.
No, it wasn't Laurie. It was
her
mom.
Her mom. Sorry, her mom from the comedian. What is her mom's name? Holy shit, I didn't write that down.
I don't know. The original Silk Spectre.
Yeah.
So yeah, the comedian assaulted the original Silk Spectre, who was Laurie's mom.
Sally Jupiter.
Yeah.
And so she's under the opinion that Hooded Justice is probably her dad because Hooded Justice and Sally Jupiter were together. Now, Hooded Justice is just an insane superhero because
He was like
the
first one.
He's the first one and also like a racist. It makes no... It doesn't pull any punches that he was like, well, who's doing all the crime in the 30s? It's the black people. So
And he had basically like a Klan hood and a noose around his neck, you know.
Yes, it's an insane superhero costume.
Which I don't know if you finished the Watchmen show. The Watchmen show investigates Hooded Justice a little bit, which is
really?
interesting.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No, I haven't watched it. I watched the first episode of the Watchmen show and realized I was like, okay, I need to like sit down and be ready for this because that was fucked up. So Laurie sort of, I don't really recall exactly how she puts it together. Like, oh, she's like remembering things that the comedian said and that Sally said throughout like all of the times that they met.
Yeah, and how the comedian was showing like her interest, and then her mom got really mad about it, and I think she thought it was because her mom. It's because she thought her mom was being protective of her, but it was really because like the comedian sort of knew she was her kid, you know, like she like reframed it in her
she's
head
worried
somehow.
that the comedian was like trying to like bring her home, but what was really happening is the comedian kept like staring at her because the comedian Edward Blake and Sally Jupiter eventually did have a relationship regardless of the rape, and that's how Laurie Juspecic was born.
Yeah, and that's also why like you see Sally, like because the part of this book is like the old night owl like wrote this book about how bad it was, and he says that's when the comedian, you know, tried to rape her, and that was called a big thing. But then like Sally Jupiter never like came out against him all the way, and then Laurie was very confused about like why her mom was like still being like weird about it and didn't like say like, no, this guy was bad, he tried to rape you, what the hell, mom, you know. And so she like puts it together in this dialogue with Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah, and she starts crying, and Dr. Manhattan, you know, takes pity and finds a little bit of humanity again.
Because I think she's like, my life is meaningless and worthless, and Dr. Manhattan's like,
and I'm
no, it's not. No, it's not.
I think it's...
Yeah, go for it.
I think it's just... I mean, it's fucking crazy. So, it's a little long, but... So she's crying, and he says, Laurie, are you all right? And Laurie says, of course not. Blake, that bastard, and my mother, they pulled a gag on me is what they did. My whole life's a joke. One big, stupid, meaningless... Oh, shit. And then Dr. Manhattan says, I don't think your life is meaningless. And Laurie's talking, and then she pauses, and then she's like, you don't? Because the whole time, Dr. Manhattan is like, no,
everything's meaningless. Yeah.
And he says, no, I changed my mind. Thermodynamic miracles, events with odds against so astronomical they're effectively impossible, like oxygen spontaneously becoming gold. I long to observe such a thing. And yet, in each human coupling, 1,000 million sperm vie for a single egg. Multiply those odds by countless generations against the odds of your ancestors being alive, meeting, siring this precise son, that precise exact daughter. Until your mother loves a man she has every reason to hate, and of that union, of the 1,000 million children competing for fertilization, it was you, only you, that emerged. to distill so specific a form from that chaos of improbability, like turning air to gold. That is the uncrowning likelihood, the thermodynamic miracle. And Laurie says, they're also having a conversation in a smiley face on Mars, by the way, which is just the pick. I love this book so much. Dave Gibbons is an incredible artist. The fact that the smiley face, the comedian's pin, appears so often throughout this book in little subtle ways is so cool. This one is not subtle; it's a big ass smiley face on Mars.
I don't think I even noticed that I'm looking for it right now.
Oh, page 27 of chapter 9. She says, "But if my birth, if that's a thermodynamic miracle, I mean, you could say that about anybody in the world." And Dr. Manhattan says, "Yes, anybody in the world. But the world is so full of people, so crowded with these miracles, that they become commonplace and we forget. I forget. We gaze continually at the world and it grows dull in our perceptions. Yet seen from another's vantage point, as if new, it may still take the breath away. Come, dry your eyes, for you are life, rarer than a quark and unpredictable beyond the dreams of Heisenberg, the clay in which the forces that shape all things leave their fingerprints most clearly. Dry your eyes, and let's go home." And then it ends with a Carl Jung quote. "As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light of meaning in the darkness of mere being." It's like, holy shit.
Good shit. It's good shit.
Yes, it is. And then Dr. Manhattan and Laurie return to Earth. And Rorschach and Night Owl, they go to his secret hidden base in Antarctica.
On little scooters.
Yeah, they look insane. Night Owl's like, "I have to put on my special snowsuit. Do you want one?" And Rorschach's like, "No, I'm good."
And he looks, Night Owl looks so goofy. He's like in a puffy owl suit.
He's so funny. And we get a scene from Veidt, Ozymandias. He's sitting evilly, like rubbing a cat in a chair, looking at all these screens. And he gets up and he starts talking to his 3 servants, who we see him interact with throughout the book. He's very nice to his servants. They're like sitting down and he's explaining his whole evil plan, like pretty much to them. He's like, "I want to be like Alexander the Great, the Conqueror. But then I realized Alexander the Great was a big loser and I could be even better than Alexander the Great." And I'm still not sure about this. Maybe just stupid, but like the assistants like stop moving. They're like drinking something and then they like freeze because like in the panel, a butterfly like lands on one of their faces and then goes away. And then he presses a button and opens the
the terrarium they're in, or whatever.
the Antarctic terrarium they're in, and floods the whole thing with snow, and kills the 3 of them.
Yeah,
because nobody can know about his plan. Obviously, they have to die. I don't know why they froze. Maybe put something in their drink. Maybe I missed like that drawing in the panel, but.
No, yeah, I missed that too. I had to go back and look. So I was like, what? Why aren't they moving when they're covered in snow? But I would assume it's like, oh, you see they're drinking something and that he planned it. And also before this, there's like, remember, like you keep hearing about like the missing artists or whatever. And
yes.
It like goes to there's like one or two panels like on an island. And the science fiction writer's like, "What do you think of this?" And it's like, "Oh, a squid." And you're like, "What's that about?" And then later on, they're like, the artists are like, "Oh, can't you believe we finally get to leave? Oh, fantastic. Let's go on this boat." And there's 2 people like having sex. And I'm like, "What's that timer?" And then it explodes the boat. So you're like, whoa, they never left the island. So what's all this stuff? And that all influences the climax that is about to occur.
Oh, and I also, we keep saying Dr. Manhattan can see everything and know what's about to happen. There's a bunch of tachyons emanating from the Antarctic that are screwing up his sort of prescient vision, so he can't. This is so that the story isn't spoiled by a character in the story. But, before Rorschach leaves, he writes because he doesn't know for sure, he writes what he thinks is happening about Adrian Veidt in his journal, and he mails it to the right-wing newspaper, The New Frontiersman. That is not really important in the scope of like the plot of the book, but it is like, the truth is going to come out, but it is going to come out by this like horrifically right-wing newspaper, so who is going to believe it? And is also the basis for the Watchmen TV show 36 years later, or however long. So once Rorschach and Night Owl get to his private Antarctic retreat. Veidt says, he just lays it all on the line. He's a classic villain monologue, and he says, the world is heading towards nuclear disaster. I'm going to stop it by uniting the world against a threat I made up, which I made it up by hiring a bunch of he kidnapped a bunch of science fiction writers and artists and movie producers and like effects artists and created a convincing giant alien squid and gave it sentience through brain matter.
He got like a psychic's brain and like programmed it, and he's gonna teleport it into the middle of Manhattan.
Yep.
And the blast radius is gonna kill several million people, and everyone who survived is gonna go crazy because he's also doing like a brain blast to show like insane images of another world that's gonna attack them. So that not only is there this physical proof, is that there's also these like mental proof that like they're under attack from some sort of extraterrestrial force.
Yep.
And then
the whole time this is happening, Rorschach keeps trying to beat up. I just think this is hilarious. He keeps trying to sneak up and like punch Ozymandias, but he just keeps like judo throwing him into tables or like pinning his stupid trench coat to a table with a fork so he can't move. And then they're like, we're going to stop you, Adrian. And he's like, stop me? I already did it 35 minutes ago. And then it cuts to New York, and the next page is New York all fucked up with a big
there's
squid.
Like so many bodies and a huge squid, and it's, oh my god, it's good.
And that is like the inversion of the comic books. The fact that, not only the fact that they can't stop the bad guy because he already did it after monologuing, but that the heroes all decide to keep what they found a secret, so that
because that's the only way it'll work.
In a nuclear apocalypse.
Yeah,
because it sucks, but he's right and it works, which is the scary part.
But also, will it take? That's the other big question, you know. And then at the end, all the superheroes are like, we got to tell someone about this, and Dr. Manhattan immediately is like, okay, well, you can't because it already happened. And if you tell everyone, all those dead lives are in absolute vain, and it's your fault. It'll be your fault.
Yeah. And Rorschach's like, fuck it, I'm going to go tell people. And Dr. Manhattan's like, please don't go, Walter. And he's like, you'll have to stop me. And he rips off his mask, and he's like, you'll have to kill me. Like, kill me. And Dr. Manhattan I'm sure you've seen, if you don't know what you're talking about, I'm positive you've seen the comic book panel because it has been memed of the man pointing and the skeleton getting like eviscerated, and that's Dr. Manhattan exploding Rorschach with a finger. And then he just goes back inside, and Ozymandias is like, so this is it, right? We did it. Like, this is the end. And Dr. Manhattan's like, nothing ever ends. And like, you see like the visage drop, and Ozymandias is like, what do you mean? And then Dr. Manhattan disappears. In the final bit of the book, we see sort of a post-credits scene of Dryberg and Juspecic. They go and visit Sally, and they just have like a new life. They're trying to be normal, which is very sweet. But then the last thing is that the right-wing newspaper, The New Frontiersman, is looking for a new story to run, and then the chief editor gives like his lackey permission to run whatever he wants from like the file of all the crazy stuff. And the final page of the book is him grabbing Rorschach's journal, and that's how it ends.
Yeah, it's very good. It's very good.
Yeah. And so now, what is your
takeaway, I guess, from this?
It is pretty bleak, huh?
Yeah.
I guess like, well, for one, as a superhero story, this is pretty mind-blowingly cool and interesting. And you could just take it like that. Like, this is an inverse of the superhero story. I find it so compelling. This could be so bad. Like, it is so... Often it teeters on becoming, like, a parody of itself.
Yeah.
But somehow, I think, escapes that. And I think that's due to the fact that Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, they really understand the medium they are writing in. I do not think, I think I have literal proof you can watch the Watchmen movie. I have proof that unless you are like a genius auteur, this does not translate to any other medium. At least not in the same way, because there's like, just recently they made a Watchmen on HBO. They made a Watchmen Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, and it's an animated show that's just exactly like almost panel for panel the comic. But so much of what makes this compelling is the form in which it is created. Like, we're going to talk about the Tales of the Black Freighter, but there's an entire comic book within this comic book that is like interspliced in panels, and you can't do that. You can't express that idea in that form through anything else.
And all the stuff like at the end of the chapter, like the article from the New Frontiersman, or like here's an excerpt from the old superhero's memoir. It just gives you more context in like this written form that like you couldn't get through just like pure like video narrative. Although I think I would say, you know, having read this and watched the show, I think the show, like the HBO live action Watchmen show, like I think really takes up a lot of the same like themes in the same way, which I think is really good and cool and interesting. I was also some things there was, you're talking about like the teetering on the edge of like it could be so bad. There are like some little tiny parts where you're like, okay. Like Ozymandias has like a gymnastics routine he does for charity, and you're like, all right. or he like catches a bullet because he's so smart or something. I don't know. Yeah. And you're like, okay.
He has a cologne called Nostalgia. I would say this is not the most subtle thing in the world.
Right.
He has a cologne called Nostalgia that is constant. Like, you see the image of the cologne being tossed through the air somehow while Laurie is being nostalgic about her life, and it's like, okay, I get it. Like, I understand.
And there's some of the there's like a lot of like we live in a society sort of stuff, and it's hard to tell like is that's the character, but also I think that's a little bit of what like they're going for, like the society is you know fucked up, you know, because no one can figure it out. My other takeaway is I like that it ended with Dr. Manhattan being like, it could work. It might work temporarily. Because I think, you know, us having gone through COVID, which you'd think something as neutral as a disease, as ostensibly politically neutral as a disease would somehow unite people more, when it in fact has done the opposite. You know, for a wide variety of reasons. You know, that doesn't bode well for Ozymandias' long-term plan. Like, maybe short-term. Like, you know, the first 2 weeks of COVID were great. And then the crazies started coming out of the woodwork. And like, what if this isn't real? And then you're like, what are you talking about? You know? Yeah. And so you can sort of imagine this world where like that starts happening. Especially, I think, you know, with Ozymandias and his name, you know, after the Shelley poem about the ruined sculpture in the sand with the plaque that says like, "Oh, my empire will last forever," but like it won't. And so definitely a choice naming yourself after a famous thing that didn't last when you're trying to make something last. But there's earlier today I read like a good scholarly article about Watchmen and morality, and I think it might be worth a read. I'll throw it in the description. It's from like Boston University or something.
So I just want to talk about
let's talk about the comic book within the comic book.
Yeah, so in this world, the only comic superhero that existed was Superman, and then when Night Owl, or Hooded Justice, who was the first superhero, started being a superhero, they stopped making superhero comics because they were like, okay, well, this is like real, so why would we do that? So instead, what is really popular in this world are pirate comic books. And we keep getting like little bits at this newsstand run by this gentleman. He's just like a normal like New York. He's classic newsstand dude. And this young boy who's reading a comic book called Tales of the Black Freighter. It's written. I don't remember the author's name in universe. The artist's name is a real guy. So some people think that this comic book is real because of that, but it is not. I think they made a show, a Tales of the Black Freighter show, which is weird. But
I also don't think this, based on what I read of this comic within the comic, I don't think it could sustain itself as like a story at all.
No. The author of the comic in universe is one of the people who's been kidnapped to the island. We learn a little bit into the story, but what it is essentially is a story about a guy trying to escape an evil. He's trying to race an evil ghost ship from hell before he's trying to get home before the ship gets there because he's stranded. And he gets there and thinks that his home has been taken over by these evil pirates, and so he's just like killing everybody and moving through and slaughtering people. And then it's revealed that there were no pirates, and he was just like gone crazy, and he's just been killing people and thought they were pirates, and he killed his whole family.
Because the way he gets on the ship, it like gets unstranded, is like the wood doesn't float enough, so he like takes all the bodies of like the people that were there and makes them float, and then he's like going through, and then sharks eat the bodies, and then he like kills the sharks, and so he's just
drinking salt water. He's going crazy.
He's literally floating on human bodies to like achieve his goal.
Yeah, so he like sees like a pirate watchman on the island, but then the comic book panel reveals it's a scarecrow, but we just get his like inner monologue. And he kills his family, and he goes back to the beach, and he sees the ship has finally arrived, and the ship was never on its way to the island to get his family. It was always on its way to the island to collect him, to bring him to hell. And a lot of people hate this part.
I was incredibly confused. As surprised as I was of how much Owl Guy stuff there was, I was surprised there was a whole other pirate comic book in this.
Yep. So a thing to remember, like I said, is a big reason that this is in here is because there's no such thing as superhero comics in this world, and so it wants to try to get across the storytelling medium within the storytelling medium of comic books. Because the character, I don't remember his name, but the character in the book is a man. He's sort of like has traits of all the heroes, the Watchmen, and oftentimes the comic book, his thoughts in the comic book, the pirate character, will be overlaid over a panel of the characters in the real world doing the same thing. And I would argue that this is more in Gibbons trying to be like, this is what this kind of story would look like in this kind of world. When we try to like do an adaptation of like a superhero story, but you make it like, I don't know, well, like Pirates of the Caribbean. Like we don't have like this obsession with, it's so funny to talk about this. We don't have this obsession with pirates that they do in this world. And so it's trying to get across that like, this would be what am I even trying to say? What am I trying to argue here?
Yeah. I get what you're saying. Like in the vacuum, in like the vacuum of if superheroes existed, what takes its place in fiction as like a popular, what captures the popular imagination in a thing that has to like stay fictional, right? That's what you're getting at.
Exactly. And the thing is, obviously, like, he's Ozymandias. He is losing his humanity in the process of trying to save himself. Yeah. And so is the character in the book. They do the same exact thing. But there is a reason why it's in so much of it. It's not just because it's like, well, check it. Isn't this cool? This is happening in this book too. Because who cares? Like, if it's just that, who cares? And there is something to be said. I'm just probably not smart enough or know enough about comics. Don't know enough about comics to express this point. But I think it's much more compelling as like, it's sort of like how in have you ever read or watched what's that? The Man in the High Castle?
I've watched some of it.
Okay, so you know how in the show there's like the film reel?
Yeah.
That is like our world.
The alternate universe, yeah.
Yeah. And the only difference in the book is that it's a book and not a film reel. It's sort of like, it's like metatextually interesting in that way of like a peek into what, because like that's an insane comic to to have. There was this whole thing in the 80s. I don't remember the Comics Act that it was, but comics had this rule that could be no killing and no sex and no like graphic violence, and the good guys always had to win. And not only is Watchmen, which came out the same year that act was signed, breaking all of that, so is the thing in the story. So that's what I mean when it's like the violence of this world is even in something like as innocuous as like a comic book.
Oh, sure.
I guess is what I'm trying to
like it's
to
like
say.
what they put in this fictional world, what they put in their comics is a reflection of that fictional world and like what they care about. I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Because even in like we get like reviews, or maybe it's not a review, but it's like a biography of the comics writer. Even the writer of the biography is like, I mean, this story is fucking horrific. There's like 12 volumes, and it's like, gee, like they just get like worse and more graphic. And we get like, we see the one that's like, people are like, this is the most like trippy and like psychologically interesting. I don't know. I find it super compelling and also sort of boring, and maybe a little bit of a pace ruiner.
Well, I think some of it, what you're sort of saying is like, I think part of what, it's Moore and Gibbons are smart enough, clearly, to like see these things they like and know a lot about and like examine it from every angle. And I think with that metatextual element, I think they're also trying to say something about what they're doing by like creating an ultra-violent, grim comic book in our world that someone might read, And so like that is also in that, it's not one way of interpreting Watchmen is it's just gratuitously violent and and like the slaughter in it only makes our brains
thank
worse.
You. This is what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Yeah.
We get like that book, which people would say about that too, but it's like, no, actually, there's interesting things.
There's
like
something
going on
about
below the surface.
And which I liked about it, because I was like, what the hell is this doing in here? But then I also like in like art when the author, especially if they're like good, like they've earned your trust, of like they put something that seems like it doesn't fit at all in there, and you sort of have to figure out why they put it in there. And so I really like that about
that's totally what this is,
because it's very much like, this guy doing whatever he can by any means necessary, and so are like all these superheroes based on like what he believes. And so it sort of shows that I think like with all the other characters, the danger of like, I believe something, I know it's right, I'm going to do whatever I can to achieve it, even though I might be wrong. Like it's the danger of, certainty. And I think there's a lot of that in Ozymandias and like a lot of other characters. And, Dr. Manhattan, when he was going to nope out on Earth, he was like, yeah, it doesn't mean anything,
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I think it all ties together.
Because I just think it's very boring for somebody to be like, well, it's just mirroring Adrian Veidt's journey. And it's like, okay, then, but why? Like, we already have Adrian Veidt's journey. Why do we need another thing to be like, look at this thing, too? Because we already have the first thing.
I think in some ways it's a lot of the, like, metaphorically, it's a lot of the characters' journeys. Like, if the through line of all of their journeys is they have a certain belief about how things are, and they go through and take certain actions towards those beliefs, like those may not be true, like with Lori and her father and all the other stuff. I think a lot of the characters have certainties that are challenged in the book, and they have to sort of come to terms with the actions they have done in the past based on those certainties.
I tried to find some funny 1-star Goodreads reviews, but it's really just a bunch of people that don't get it.
Are there anything funny?
No,
or
they're all just sort of make me upset.
like an example. I want like a really like the most egregious example, or a lot of them just like, this is just violent and I don't like it.
Well, this is here's a person who gave it 1 star. This is sort of people aren't all saying this, but when you read the review, you're like, I think this is what's going on. But this person was very On September 3rd, 2007, this person wrote, "I have to be fair, this is one of the best written, most well thought out stories I've ever seen. But it is just too darn dark for my taste. And believe me, I can handle dark, but seriously."
Then that's really it.
Yeah.
People just don't like how depressing it is.
Yeah, or they're like, this is not my cup of tea. And it's like, okay.
Well, that's fair.
It's just, fair. Yeah. So there's nothing... I couldn't find anything egregiously funny to read, which is a shame. Also, it's really highly rated, so there's only like a few one-star reviews anyway.
It is hard. There's something to be said about something so good that even people who dislike it have to admit that it's good.
Yeah. The only thing I could see somebody having a problem with is like, I didn't enjoy reading this and not sort of realizing it's because they don't enjoy reading comics, not because they don't enjoy the story. So, Danilo, do you have any final thoughts?
It's interesting because I think, we don't... I've said almost thing I wanted to say, but one last thing is like, we don't live in the Cold War, and I think, this book does explore lots of things that aren't nuclear Armageddon. I think that's... But like something it is very concerned about, as I think they were in the 80s during the Cold War, was nuclear Armageddon. And the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore for us.
Right.
So like that's less of a, I think, touch point. Like that's less of a possibility. Like I think, there are still nukes, but we don't have this like arms race going on. We still have political instability in certain areas, but I think it's maybe not as intense as it was, or we're just used to it. Like it's the whole thing about nuclear war. Like if you're born with a gun to your head, do you really notice it ever?
Right.
So that's just another aspect of this I thought it was interesting. Like I was reading it and I'm like, I'm not really worried about the Cold War anymore. But it's also an alternate universe and all that, et cetera, et cetera. So, but other than that, I thought it was fantastic. I went on vacation. It was great. And I loved it, and it was some of the best stuff I've read. So,
yeah. Sorry if this isn't. Maybe you just listened to 2 episodes of us complaining for 90 minutes, and you thought that was funny. And this is not that. This is sort of reminds me of when we read The Dispossessed right after reading.
Right.
Whatever that. What is that called? Mistborn.
Mistborn? Yeah.
So Danilo, how many Mistborns would you give Watchmen?
A negative Dr. Manhattan, I think.
Yeah. Negative all and none of the Mistborns in the world. I think so. Well, this is just... there's a reason it is one of Time Magazine's 100 best novels for a reason.
Yeah. And, maybe it's not as fun to listen to us talk about how good something is as it is to dunk on it, but hey, here we are.
But for our sanity...
Our sanity, we need to read
good.
something good every once in a while. Because otherwise we're just going to be talking about prose and fucking gem lights and whatever.
If you're reading along with us, our next book we're going to be reading, this might seem insane what I'm about to say, but we're both really excited about it, is Dungeon Crawler Carl. So if you're reading along, I think we'll just do the whole thing probably.
I think so. Yeah.
I
think it's one of those books that seems like it's going to be bad and dumb, but a lot of people end up really liking it. So that is why we're reading it. I think it recently came out in hardcover. I think it used to only be an ebook, but
it did. And it makes me nervous that people liked it so much as an ebook, maybe because the narrator is funny. And so maybe that will not translate to the written word. But I don't care. That's what we're going to investigate.
Yep. Well, it was an ebook, not a audiobook.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I know for a fact people love the audiobook because he's very funny. Okay. He sort of talks like a video game character, like with his gravelly voice. It's apparently
I don't know. Humor in written stuff is very different for me. I don't know. So we'll see how this
hit or miss.
We'll see how this goes.
Yeah, we will see. Follow us on your social medias. We're at Hardcover Hooligans on Instagram, YouTube Hardcover Hooligans.
Well, if you listen to these on YouTube, hey, thank you. Leave a comment.
Yeah, thank you. Please leave a comment. Thanks to all the comments and stuff on our YouTube video about
Stormlight Archive.
It's pretty cool to see people agree with us. Makes me feel like we're not going crazy.
Yep.
we gotten some more fan mail, so thank you for that. That's really been really awesome. It makes this feel like we're really doing this and people are listening and we're not just losing our minds in our respective rooms. But yeah, I think that's it. So
sounds good. All right, stay watchful, folks.
Yeah, stay watchful.
Watch the
who watches the who hards the hooligans.